guess I read these stories, Mike's story and the post reporting on what is in the book, and it strikes me as a catastrophic failure that Donald Trump was left in office by the people who around him were so terrified by what they saw in his, it's described as mania by Woodward and Costa. I think it just begs all sorts of questions about what he was doing in command of the nation's nuclear arsenal.
There's no question, Nicole, that he was unfit and that he met every standard that you could have ever possibly thought through for invocation of the 25th Amendment and to be relieved of duty because he was incapacitated. But I think it's important to understand what General McCaffrey is saying. According to the law in 1986, the Goldwater-Nichols Act, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff has no lawful authority to issue orders to the combatant commanders. Those orders flow from the president to the Secretary of Defense. So, in fact, the representation that, hey, I'm involved in this process around launching nuclear weapons is, in fact, not correct. Secondarily, and I agree with General McCaffrey, I do think that history will likely regard General Milley as an honorable man. But what this represents is a shattering of civilian-military relations in this country. On whose instructions did the principal military advisor and senior-ranking military officer in the United States pick up the phone and have that conversation with General Lee in China? Who initiated that conversation? Was he responding to a prompt from the Chinese? The American people, and certainly the American government, the Congress of the United States and its oversight capacity has to get an answer to this. Now, I don't blame General Milley for any of this, in as much as I blame Donald Trump after years of vandalism, the near collapse of the government of the United States. And what you see here is the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff acting outside of any boundaries that were ever considered for the job in an extra constitutional manner. I think that should frighten all of us. It's extremely alarming.
Mike Schmidt is back. Mike, let me read from this section that you've reported on of this back channel conversation that is reported in the book. Quote, things may look unsteady, the chairman, General Mark Milley, told General Lee of China on January 8th, 2 days after Trump supporters stormed the Capitol to try to stop the certification of his election loss. And in the second of two such calls, quote, but that's the nature of democracy, General Lee. We are 100% steady. Everything's fine, but democracy can be sloppy sometimes. The next paragraph in the book goes on to reveal that General Milley didn't think things were quite as contained as he tried to make it sound like they were. And one of the more extraordinary passages that you guys have written about is a transcript that Robert and Bob obtained from the Pelosi-Milley call, where he agrees with her, at least according to the transcript, in all of her assessments of the danger he represents, the danger that the people around him represent, that none of them stopped him on January 6th, Ivanka and Jared and what's his name, the chief of staff, Meadows. They just went along with it. So I wonder, Mike, what the indictment is of the people around the ex-president.
Well, I'm not sure. I sort of see this in the larger context as sort of the ultimate culmination of the Trump presidency. You know, I go back to the early days where Trump is trying to convince Comey to drop the Flynn investigation, and Comey getting fired and everything that comes out after that, and the efforts to sort of contain Trump as he's trying to go after Mueller. And in those first 2 years, Trump, gets in a lot of trouble for a range of things, but ultimately in the second 2 years is unshackled and is truly unbound. And I think that's what we see in this last few months of the presidency. It's just the ultimate unboundness of Donald Trump and the ultimate fear of those who still remained. The Don McGahns, John Kellys of the world, the range of other people who were sort of buffers around the president were long gone. Jared and Ivanka were fully empowered as they had ever been. And, this is what we saw. And, they couldn't get Trump to do a lot of things, even accepting the election results. Whatever. There's so many different examples you could name. But this is Donald Trump at his rawest at the top of government, with few other people there, because he was able to get rid of them. He was able to isolate them. He hollowed out the top of the FBI. He was able to convince his attorney general to leave a month early, because the attorney general wanted to get out because he knew that nothing good could happen in that last month. And Milley, sort of stuck in his 2-year tenure in his position, was still there.
It is a good point, General McCaffrey, to look at this as a continuum, but I think the Milley piece is an evolution as well. I mean, in that unshackled phase, Donald Trump forcibly cleared Lafayette Square after the murder of George Floyd, and General Milley was there in fatigues. He put out a video apologizing, and I'm sure he did heroic and moral and ethical things before that moment, but it seems that he really understood the danger Trump represented in everything we've learned about him after that moment. I wonder if you have any insights into Milley as a guardrail, the last one, as Mike's basically explaining.
Throughout this whole period, I had rather firsthand understanding of what was going on in government, and it scared me. I was convinced, without question, that we were on the edge of an ultimate constitutional crisis. I thought it was unlikely that Trump would use nuclear weapons, although he had full legal and constitutional authority in theory to command that. But there's one that bothered me the most was the Secretary of Defense was an acting SecDef. The Constitution says the Senate will be involved in approving senior officers of government. There was nobody left. So I think what General Milley was doing, and by the way, routinely, the chairman, the service chiefs, the joint combatant commanders routinely are in contact with their counterparts globally as part of the deterrence of unwanted combat. I think he felt it important to not end up with a World War I start of a war through miscalculation on the part of the Chinese. So again, I think we ought to be fortunate. We got this Princeton grad, tremendous combat officer, extremely intelligent, law-based, trying to safeguard the transition to a duly elected President Biden administration. He was scared to death of what the country was on the edge of.
General McCaffrey, you just made clear that you knew in real time some of the pressures that he was under. And I just want to press you on that. Was he ever concerned that the transition of power would never come to pass? Not only that it would be violent, I mean, the insurrection came to pass, but did they have a plan written and put in an actual secure server for removing him if he refused to leave?
Well, first of all, I never speak on the part of the active senior military officers in the armed forces.
Understood.
Never would do it. I'm totally aware of the conversations that go on. There is zero possibility of the U.S. Armed Forces ever being involved directly in the transition of power. Never going to happen. Milley would have turned to Congress and said, it's your job, the Supreme Court, the media, the voters. The U.S. Armed Forces would have refused any orders to uninstall the president. They would have said, get the federal marshals to go over there and arrest him. So I think we ought to put that aside. It's not even on the table. What is on the table was a genuine concern that you might start a war with Iran, a genuine concern that they get an order that sounded pretty legal, the Insurrection Act, deploy to 10 American cities with active duty military power and control the streets. Mr. Trump was totally out of control. He was lawless. He was ranting. We were, again, in great peril. We ought to be grateful we had a series of people, to include the media, I might add, and the Congress to some extent, that tried to put guardrails around this guy before he left office.